I had always believed that our life was perfect. Amanda and we had built something beautiful over the years. She was stunning, intelligent, and had a successful career in finance. I was a professor at a prestigious university in New York. Our relationship, our home, everything seemed like it was in the right place. There was a certain rhythm to our lives, one I had come to cherish. But then something began to change. It started small, almost imperceptible. A slight shift in her tone, a distracted look in her eyes when we spoke. It wasn't anything I could pinpoint, but over time I began to feel it, a growing distance between us. Amanda, the woman I had shared my life with, seemed like a stranger in moments when I needed to see her the most. I told myself I was overreacting. She had a demanding job and life in New York was never simple. But deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a quiet, nagging discomfort that never fully went away. One evening as we prepared for an event, I caught a glimpse of something that would change everything. The charity gala we attended that night was filled with the usual crowd: business leaders, professors, artists, people who all thrived in the fast-paced world of New York. Amanda looked stunning, of course. She always did. We spent the early part of the evening mingling, but I couldn't shake the unease that settled in the pit of my stomach. I wandered around the room, speaking briefly with a few colleagues and old friends. But as I was making my way back toward Amanda, I noticed her speaking to Eric, a colleague from her office. They were laughing, too loudly perhaps, but it was their body language that struck me. Amanda's hand was on Eric's arm, no, not just resting there but lingering. A touch that lasted too long. I felt my breath catch in my chest. It wasn't a casual touch. It was intimate, the kind of touch that shouldn't belong to a professional relationship. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't look away. I stayed at a distance, watching, unable to fully comprehend what I was seeing. Amanda seemed so at ease, so comfortable with Eric. I hadn't seen her like that in months, certainly not with me. The unease in my gut bloomed into something darker, something much more unsettling. But I didn't confront her. Not right then. Not in front of all those people. I stood there, frozen, as I watched Amanda's eyes twinkle with a kind of affection I hadn't seen directed toward me in what felt like forever. It was like the ground beneath me had shifted, and I was left trying to make sense of what had just happened. I told myself I'd be calm. I'd give it time, I'd wait. But the truth had already begun to form in my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't ignore what I had just witnessed. I knew something had changed and I wasn't sure if I wanted to face it. The evening passed in a blur. We said our goodbyes and returned home, but all I could think about was Amanda and Eric. It was clear to me now that something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Amanda didn't seem to notice anything was wrong when we got home. She went about her routine, preparing for the next day, almost as if the night hadn't happened. But for me, everything had changed. I was no longer sure where I fit into her world. I didn't confront her. Not yet. But as I lay in bed beside her, I knew one thing for sure: I had to find out the truth. And when I did, I wasn't sure I would be able to stay. Days passed after that night, but the silence between Amanda and me grew louder with each passing hour. She seemed oblivious to the tension that had settled between us. If she noticed anything amiss in my behavior, she never mentioned it. I, on the other hand, found myself more withdrawn, more distant. It was like living with a stranger in the same house, someone you once knew deeply but now felt completely disconnected from. Amanda still had her charm, her smile, her laugh, but something had shifted. I couldn't bring myself to look at her the same way anymore. Her presence, once so comforting, now only reminded me of the distance that had crept in, slowly but unmistakably. I began to wonder how long it had been there, how long I had been blind to it. Was this the first crack in our marriage, or had it started long before that night? The touch between her and Eric at the gala replayed in my mind over and over again. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I still hadn't said a word to her about it. Part of me feared what might happen if I confronted her. What if I was wrong? What if I misunderstood the whole situation? But another part of me felt an overwhelming urge to know the truth, even if it tore everything apart. A week later, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I would not confront her, not yet. Instead, I would watch, observe her, and see where the pieces fell. I would give her the space to reveal herself if she were willing. It was a quiet, almost passive decision. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the only choice I had left. Every evening, I'd watch her come home from work, her face glowing from a long day in the office. She would greet me with a kiss, ask about my day, and I'd respond in kind, keeping the mask of normalcy firmly in place. But I was no longer fully present. I was quietly planning my next move, watching for signs that would tell me everything I needed to know. The nights we spent together were becoming harder to bear. We'd eat dinner in silence, the conversation awkward and strained. I began to feel like I was living in a dream, a parallel reality where nothing felt real anymore. I kept asking myself if this was the life I truly wanted to keep. Was this the woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with? Or had I been so blind to her actions that I missed the truth hiding in plain sight? I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I knew that. The decision was looming over me. I had to act even if it meant losing everything. And so I started to prepare. I began by erasing traces of my presence in the apartment. Files from my office, my old journals, any personal belongings I didn't want her to find, I removed them one by one, silently, as if I were a ghost. I even started selling off things we no longer needed, our second car, some of the furniture we never used. It was a quiet surrender, a way to cut ties without saying a word. In my mind, I had already made the choice. I was going to disappear from her life, completely. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of this silent betrayal, unsure of where I stood. If Amanda couldn't see me for who I was anymore, then I had no place in her life. I hadn't decided exactly when it would happen. But the longer I waited, the clearer it became that there was no turning back. The woman I had loved, the woman I had shared everything with, was slipping further and further away from me. And I was no longer sure if I could hold on. The plan had begun to take shape. Every morning, I would leave for my university office like I always had, pretending that nothing had changed. But in reality, I was making preparations behind the scenes. Each evening, I'd return home to the apartment, still acting the part of a husband who was blind to the truth. But deep down, I was already gone. Amanda didn't notice the changes. She never questioned the missing items, the empty spaces in the closet, the quiet days that passed without any mention of our future plans. It seemed as though she was lost in her own world, caught up in her routine, while I was slowly unraveling the threads of our life. The most painful part was the nights we spent together. Amanda would curl up beside me in bed and I would feel the weight of her body against mine, but it felt so different now. The warmth that once comforted me only reminded me of how far we had drifted apart. I lay there, pretending to sleep, all the while knowing that I was slowly slipping away from her, physically and emotionally. I had become a shadow in my own life. The breaking point came one evening when Amanda came home later than usual. She had a certain glow about her that night, something I had seen before, something I hadn't seen directed at me in far too long. She was smiling, happy, as if the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. "James, I was thinking," she said as she slipped off her coat and walked into the kitchen. "How about we take a weekend trip soon? Just the two of us. A little getaway, you know?" Her voice was light, casual. But I could hear the underlying hesitation, the way she watched me as she said it, as if trying to gauge my reaction. The idea was kind, but there was no spark in me to respond. There was no excitement. There was only the heavy realization that everything we once had was slipping through my fingers. "I don't think so," I said quietly, not looking up. "I've got too much to handle at work." Her face fell slightly, but she masked it quickly. "Oh, all right. Maybe another time." And that was it. There was no more talk about it, no more discussions, just the empty silence of an evening that we couldn't seem to fill anymore. She moved around the kitchen, preparing dinner, but there was a distance between us that neither of us seemed willing to acknowledge. I had to do it. The decision was no longer a choice, it was an inevitability. I was already gone in every sense except physically. The next morning I didn't leave for work. I stayed in the apartment and continued with my quiet preparations. I sold off the last few items, small things that wouldn't be missed. I arranged for a friend to take the rest of my belongings. It felt surreal, as though I were watching someone else's life play out, but I kept going. Around noon I sat down at my desk and wrote the letter. It was short, simple. No grand speeches, no blame, just the truth that had been eating away at me. "Amanda, I know what has been happening. I've seen the way you look at him. I can't do this anymore. I've tried to ignore it, tried to pretend, but I can't lie to myself anymore. I'm leaving. I won't come back. I need to disappear from your life, from all of this. It's over. James." It wasn't the letter I had imagined writing when I first thought about leaving her. I had imagined shouting, crying, arguing, but none of that felt right. It wasn't necessary. What was necessary was for me to leave, to walk away and never look back. I hid the letter in the one place she would find it. The old journal we used to keep together. The one we used to fill with our thoughts, our dreams, our hopes for the future. It was ironic in a way that this would be the place where everything would come to an end. That night after dinner, I kissed her on the cheek as usual. She smiled and headed off to bed, blissfully unaware that I was already gone in every way that mattered. The next morning I was gone. I had packed the last of my things, erased every trace of myself from the apartment, and left without a word. The only thing left was the letter. And that was how I disappeared. Weeks passed, and the silence between Amanda and me grew louder in her absence. I had erased myself from her life as completely as I could, and now there was only emptiness left in my wake. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, without the sound of my footsteps, without my presence at the dinner table or the sound of my voice offering a response to her questions. The world around her carried on, and yet, everything had changed. Amanda was living in a world I no longer existed in, and she was searching for answers in a place where none could be found. I had anticipated this. I knew she would look for me. After all, she was my wife, and even though I had removed myself, I wasn't blind to the fact that she would feel my absence, even if she couldn't explain it. But I wasn't there to witness it. I didn't hear her cries, or the soft whispers of confusion that must have slipped from her lips as she stood in our empty apartment, looking for clues that weren't there. I had left everything behind: my phone, my email, my contacts. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. There could be no trace of me left for her to follow. But I could not completely escape the pull of our past. I had left my things, my thoughts, and now only a letter remained. I had hoped that it would be enough. I thought maybe, just maybe, Amanda would read the letter, understand the weight of my decision, and somehow come to terms with it. But I underestimated her. I should have known she would search, dig deeper, ask questions, and refuse to believe that I could simply disappear from her life without a word. A few days after my departure, Amanda showed up at my office. I had been expecting it, but it still hit me like a shock. The door to my office opened slowly, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her face a mixture of confusion and desperation. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the vulnerability, and yet I couldn't bring myself to speak to her. "James," she said, her voice soft but filled with uncertainty. "Where are you? Why did you leave?" I said nothing. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to explain myself, or worse, see the pain in her eyes and give in to the temptation to take her back. I had made my choice, and it was final. Amanda stepped into the room, her heels clicking softly on the floor as she approached me. She reached out as if hoping to touch me, but I took a step back, keeping a careful distance. "James, please," she continued, her voice cracking now. "What did I do wrong? Why didn't you tell me? You just vanished. I thought we were fine. I thought everything was fine." There it was, the guilt, the confusion in her voice. I felt a pang in my chest. It was painful to hear, but I couldn't give in. I couldn't let myself feel the comfort of her presence again. I had left for a reason, and I couldn't go back. "I don't think you understand," I said quietly, my voice strained. "You don't get it. This was the only way. There was no other option." She stared at me, her eyes welling up with tears. I could see her hands trembling as she tried to grasp what I was saying. "You're right," she whispered. "I don't get it. But I need to know why you left. Why couldn't you just talk to me? We could have fixed this. I would have fixed this." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I couldn't let them reach me. There was no going back to the way things were. And there was no fixing it, not after what I had seen, not after what I knew. I could feel my resolve starting to waver, but I pushed it away. I couldn't fall back into the trap of second-guessing myself. It was already too late. "I can't do this anymore, Amanda," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I can't fix what's broken between us. I've already left. I'm not coming back." Amanda's face fell, and I saw the realization hit her like a physical blow. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes filled with disbelief, as if she couldn't quite fathom what I was saying. But there was nothing else to say. And just like that, she turned and walked away from me. She was searching for something, anything that could explain my disappearance. But I knew now that the only thing left for her to find was the truth, the painful, undeniable truth that I was gone, and there was no going back. I left my office, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallways as I left behind the last thread of my past life. I knew she wouldn't give up. I knew Amanda would search for me until the end, trying to make sense of everything that had happened, trying to fix the pieces that I had already broken. But I was done. In the end, all she would have left was the letter I had written. The words that would explain everything, even though they never could. Months passed after that encounter. I had hoped at some point that Amanda would give up, that the search would end. I expected her to move on with her life, to accept what had happened, and to find closure in the same way I had, by walking away and leaving behind everything we had shared. But I had underestimated her. Amanda was a force, and when she wanted answers, she would stop at nothing to find them. I stayed away, deliberately keeping my life separate from hers. I didn't check in on her, didn't watch from a distance. I had told myself I would disappear completely, and so I did. I found a new city, a new life. The days blended into one another, and while I didn't feel the same sense of guilt that had haunted me at first, there was always a quiet echo in my mind, a whisper of the life I had left behind. But the silence that had followed my departure was broken when I received a letter. It came in a simple, unmarked envelope. There was no return address, no hint of where it had come from. I recognized the handwriting immediately. James, I can't stop thinking about what happened. I've gone through everything trying to understand where we went wrong. I don't think I'll ever understand why you left without a word. I've tried to reach out to you, but you've disappeared. I know I've made mistakes and I know I hurt you, but I need to know if I can ever make things right. Can we talk? Please, James. I'm still here. I always will be. It was Amanda's letter. The words were desperate, pleading, yet there was no anger, no accusation. Just an overwhelming sense of loss, of longing. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read her words. The guilt, the pain, it all rushed back to me in a flood. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. I knew if I did, everything would unravel. The life I had built would collapse under the weight of everything I was running from. Instead, I burned the letter. The flames consumed the paper as I watched, the smoke rising, dissipating into the air. There was no going back. There was no place for her in my new life, and there couldn't be. A part of me wanted to reach out, to tell her that I understood, that I too had suffered, that I too had loved her once. But that part of me was buried deep down, sealed away with everything else I had left behind. I was someone else now, in a different world, far from the one Amanda and I had shared. Weeks went by and I received no more letters, no more calls. Life resumed its usual course, and I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, Amanda had finally accepted that I was gone. The silence that followed her letter was a kind of peace, and I held on to it, trying not to think about what she might be going through. But one afternoon something changed. I was walking through the park near my new apartment when I saw her. She was sitting on a bench, a book in her lap, staring out into the distance. She hadn't seen me yet, and for a moment I just stood there watching her. The woman I had once loved. The woman I had thought I would spend my entire life with. I couldn't help it. I took a step forward, my feet moving on their own, drawn to her presence as if I had no control over my own actions. But as I neared, I stopped. I couldn't do it. She looked up, her eyes catching mine for a split second, but I turned away before she could fully recognize me. It wasn't her I was running from anymore. It was the life we had built, the pain I couldn't bear to face. I had already left her, and I had to keep leaving, even if it meant walking away from her one final time. With one last look, I turned and disappeared into the crowd. The silence between us grew again, but this time it was final. I had vanished completely. Amanda would never truly understand why I left, and perhaps that was the cruelest part of it all. I had given her no explanation, no closure, no reason for the emptiness I left behind. But I couldn't stay in the past. I had to move forward, away from the life we had shared. The chapter between Amanda and me had closed. The story was over, and it was time for both of us to find our separate ways in a world that would never be the same again.